Sometimes our eyes deceive us. We may fall for a mirage or a trick of the light, but sometimes that deceit is by design. We've been devising ways to trick each other for centuries, often to scare the daylights out of someone, conjuring up phony ghosts or lopping off heads. Illusions come in all shapes and forms, and they're a perfect medium for horror, whether that's in a séance parlor, on the stage, or even in a photograph. So suspend your disbelief, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, and let's take a look at history's horrific illusions. You can see the roots of contemporary stage magic emerging in the 16th century, with guillotine acts like the decapitation of John the Baptist, in which one actor poses as the body and the other as the severed head. Optical illusions were fair game, and one of the most striking effects was the camera obscura. When light passes through a pinhole into a dark room, it can project an image of what's outside. Have you ever cut a hole in a cardboard box to watch an eclipse? It's kind of like that. This effect is a natural phenomenon, and humans have observed the camera obscura since ancient times, with Greek and Chinese philosophers Aristotle and Mosey recording their own descriptions. By the 1500s, swindlers were already using the camera obscura for their magic acts, and some charlatans would even scare people out of their money by claiming they could conjure demons, and they would use the camera obscura's effect as proof. A good illusion can leave you guessing how it's done, and a great illusion can even make you believe what you've seen. When no clear explanation was available, some onlookers would assume that there was something unnatural at work, and some illusionists were associated with witchcraft and conjuring. That could be an intriguing selling point for some performers, but Europe in the early modern period was no place to be considered a witch. But even in those dark times, some scholars spoke out against the abject cruelty. In fact, the Dutch physician Johann Weyer, who wrote one of the age's most prominent grimoires, the Pseudo-Monarchia Daemonum, argued that illusions were heresy and not the more severe crime of witchcraft. And in 1584, Reginald Scot published The Discovery of Witchcraft in defense of whom he saw to be innocent people wrongly accused. Sadly, Scott's call for reason was ahead of its time, and his message was censored. It wouldn't be until the Age of Enlightenment and the Witchcraft Act of 1735 that England would ease its persecution of suspected witches. Public interest in illusions remained, and magicians could perform their act without fear of punishment. This paved the way for modern magic acts, and it also set the stage for some ghostly illusions in the theater. We use the term smoke and mirrors to imply trickery, an attempt to disguise what's really happening. It refers to the methods performers would use to create illusions in a unique form of theater known as phantasmagoria. Building on methods established centuries earlier, performers would present themselves as magicians, necromancers, or even skeptics who reveal the secrets of their peers. The camera obscura evolved into devices like the magic lantern, an early projector with lamps and slides. And if projected on glass, it could even create a transparent effect. And these spirit shows had a big impact on horror literature. Stories had already presented ghosts as shadows or shades of their former selves, but these ethereal projections helped codify ghosts as transparent in Victorian imaginations. The methods behind phantasmagoria weren't relegated to the stage. In fact, performers first tried out these special effects to spice up their seances. In the 1770s, a man named Johann held seances in which he would claim to conjure spirits of the dead, and it sounds like they were pretty convincing. Schroepfer would have attendees fast before the seance, and he would also serve them punch before entering a dark room. Dim light, an empty stomach, and a belly full of punch certainly helped them believe what they were about to see. Once in the dark room, they would gather around a table, and he forbid anyone from getting up from the table under any circumstances. In 1774, Schroepfer held a seance for Prince Karl von Saxon of Dresden. The two had a rocky relationship up until this point. Schroepfer had previously caused trouble for a Freemason lodge in Minerva, so the prince had called for his arrest. But Schroepfer was in rare form for the prince, with roaring thunder, ethereal music, and the ghostly visage of the prince's deceased uncle. The act was so terrifying that attendees pleaded with Schroepfer to call the whole thing off and send the spirit away. It's suspected that Schroepfer used the magic lantern to conjure his ghosts, and he might have used glass tubes or hidden pipes to bring in his ethereal music and the voices of actors. One of his Freemason friends happened to be a pharmacist with a collection of curiosities, including some early projection devices. In the 1780s and 90s, a showman named Philidor toured Europe with a magic act where he, depending on how well he was received, claimed to either conjure spirits or reveal the secrets of the trade, and he used every trick in the book: smoke, fireworks, magic lanterns. He just wasn't very good at it. In 1789, Philidor held a show in Berlin where he promised to call up ghosts, but the crowd was unconvinced. The room was filled with too much smoke, the projections were hard to see, and one of the ghosts showed up in clothes that wouldn't make sense for the time that they lived. The audience caused a scene and eventually just asked to leave, and apparently Philidor's show was so bad he was banned from ever performing in Prussia again. After that train wreck, Philidor was motivated to improve his shows, and he eventually enjoyed some positive reception. As the century came to a close, a performer known simply as Robertson perfected the phantasmagoric art. His proprietary phantascope was essentially an early slide projector. Robertson's tinkering with the lanterns allowed for dynamic images that could grow or shrink and appear to move, while a cloud of smoke ensured that no one got to see the effects too clearly. Before he took his show on the road, Robertson's choice of venue was an abandoned convent in Paris. There he would terrify guests with a host of flying skeletons, ghosts, and claps of thunder. For those petrified in the dark, it seemed incredibly real. By the end of the century, Robertson's notoriety for conjuring the dead even caught the attention of the French authorities. He was putting on his ghost shows right on the heels of the French Revolution, and the country had just disposed of their monarchy a few years prior. The police shut down his act for a time, out of fear that he might bring the country's last king, Louis XVI, back from the dead. Phantasmagoria had grown in popularity throughout the 1700s, and the ingenuity behind these effects continued to develop into the next century. By the 1860s, John Henry Pepper had devised a reflection trick now known as Pepper's Ghost. For this trick, a glass pane is positioned on stage to reflect an illuminated actor that would otherwise be hidden offstage. You can still see this effect in use today at the Haunted Mansion ride at Disneyland. While performers amazed audiences with live phantasmagoria, a technological breakthrough would open up a whole new world of visual trickery. The invention of the photo camera was quickly followed by the development of trick photography. By mid-century, photographers were experimenting with double exposure. Take a photo, then expose that same plate a second time to blend two photos. You can superimpose one image over the other, often with a transparent, ghostly effect. This was in the age of spiritualism, so for a few unscrupulous photographers, this effect offered a lucrative opportunity. With the spiritualist movement, there was a heightened interest in the afterlife, particularly with communicating with the dead. And in the US, so many Americans had lost loved ones to the Civil War, there was a desire to see if there was anything after death, if they were still out there. So when a new class of charlatans saw this grief and longing for connection, they knew just how to take advantage of it. In 1862, William Mumler shared a self-portrait with a vague image of a woman behind him. He claimed that this was the ghost of his cousin, who had been dead for years. The public interest in this revelation allowed him to quit his day job and start a new grift as a spirit photographic medium. He took advantage of grieving people who wanted to see their loved ones again. People who just wanted to take some comfort knowing there was something after this life. And he even had the gall to fake a photo of Mary Todd Lincoln with the ghost of Honest Abe in the background. But 7 years after his first deceitful selfie, Mumler's gravy train ran off the tracks. Observers began to notice that the people posing as ghosts in his photos were still alive, so he was taken to court for fraud. Ultimately, though, he was acquitted because it was hard to disprove what he was saying. Strangely. Detractors didn't spare him, though, and among his loudest critics was none other than P.T. Barnum. Imagine, if you're so deceitful that P.T. Barnum is calling you out, you need to change. You hit rock bottom and made a crater. And Mumler wasn't the only huckster peddling spirit photos, but spirit photos weren't the only game in town. Other photographers shared the tricks of the trade for some good, clean fun. Do you remember the head-chopping illusion from earlier? Well, heads kept rolling all the way into the 1800s. With the advent of trick photography, Victorians took advantage of the tech to pose for headless portraits. In the later half of the century, Victorians would pose for two separate portraits, which would then be merged together to create this headless illusion. They'd sometimes hold a blade to imply a self-beheading, or otherwise just hold their head like they don't know where to put it. And look at this guy. He looks like Jeff Bridges with a sword. He's so happy holding up his head like he just caught a big fish. And that's not the only headless trend to be photographed. Have you ever heard of horse manning? Maybe you've seen this image floating around online. It's usually accompanied by text saying that this style of photo was a fad in the 1920s, but I haven't been able to find much verifying any dates. However, there are some old photos of people posing in beheaded fashion, often just covered in sand at the beach. It takes two to make this illusion work. One acts as the body, the other as the head. But you knew that, right? And YouTube, to be clear, these are staged photos. It's not real. Everyone in these photos is still alive. I mean, it was from 100 years ago, but this trend did experience a modern resurgence in 2011, and really, I think this is a fun one. You can even try this one yourself, whether you get a friend involved or rely on some Photoshop magic. See? These photos show that for as long as we've had access to cameras, we've wanted to play with them. Well, I hope you had fun. If you enjoyed this video, stick around because I have more to come very soon. If you love horror, whether that's literature, film, or the weird history that inspires it, you're in the right place. Bye for now.